When I look out in all your faces, I wonder what trials and transitions you've been through this year since I saw you last. Some of you have mentioned some of them, and I've thought, oh, and I've thought they would all fill that box, that treasure box that's been there at during the family times. I'll just share one or two things that have happened with me since I saw you last. In January, my son left home and we became empty nesters. In January, my daughter Kirsty, who had gone away to train as a nurse, came back to Hastings, our local city, and started nursing there. The beginning of February, my nephew's 4-year-old niece died of leukemia. The end of February, the medical laboratory I worked in closed and we all became redundant. But God knew that I needed a bit of extra time and I visited family. In June, I spent 10 days down in Wellington with my sister because her partner, who was a very fit man, unexpectedly had to have a 5-graft coronary bypass. The next week after being down there, I had a weekend at home, and then I went to Palmerston North for a week because my brother's widow had a 3-pound tumour removed from above her elbow down to her wrist. Fortunately, it was benign, it was in one sac, so her arm did not have to be amputated. In August, a man I worked with in the lab committed suicide. And last month, my elderly mother, who's 86, was in hospital for 2 weeks. She came home a couple of weeks ago now. I was down there with her again. But she really probably needs to go into a rest home, but is not ready in herself to do that. I tell you this because I'm going to be talking about stress today. And stress to me is not a theory. It's life. Is it a part of your life? It's a part of all of us. There's nobody that this does not relate to. But God brought my attention to how important the mind and the body is in a very unusual way back in 1998 when I first started giving talks on health matters. And I was driving along in the car one day and I glanced down at the digital clock and it said 4:44. And I said to the kids, oh, look at that pattern of numbers. And then the next day, I had to phone somebody and there was that pattern of numbers, 444, and the phone number. And then I was sitting at the lights and I glanced down at the license plate of the car in front of me and it had 444 in it. And it was always 444. It was never 333 or 777 or 666. It was always that 444. And then one morning I woke with a start and I sat bolt upright in bed and I looked ahead and the digital clock said 444. And in my head I felt very impressed. Take special note, pay special attention to this number. And I had no idea what that meant. So I prayed and I asked that God would reveal it to me in His timeless way. Well, it wasn't long after that, but I was looking up one of my favourite quotes by Ellen White, and it was on Testimonies Volume 5, page 444. And as soon as I saw it, I knew this is what I had to pay attention to. This is what it said. Sickness of the mind prevails everywhere. 90% of the diseases that men suffer from have their foundation, their root here. Perhaps some living home trouble is like a canker eating to the very soul and weakening the life forces. Remorse for sin sometimes undermines the constitution and unbalances the mind. There are erroneous doctrines also, as that of an eternally burning hell and the endless torment of the wicked, that by giving exaggerated and distorted views of the character of God have produced the same result upon sensitive minds. And you know, life itself can be a living hell when we don't understand the true character of God. made the most of these unfortunate cases, attributing insanity to religion. But this is a gross libel, and one which they will not be pleased to meet by and by. The religion of Christ, so far from being the cause of insanity, is one of its most effectual remedies, for it is a potent soother of the nerves. So this morning what I want to do is I want to talk about the 9/10 of diseases and about how the mind affects the body. And then this afternoon we're going to look at Jesus being the effectual remedy and a potent soother of the nerves. Now, to understand how the mind affects the body, we need to know something about the two communication systems. That is the nervous system and the endocrine system. Now, the nervous system is very fast acting. Its action isn't so sustained, and it uses chemicals called neurotransmitters, which are produced in the nerves. The endocrine system, which is our hormone system, it's slow acting, but it has a more sustained action, and it uses chemicals called hormones. You've heard of that word, hormones? And they are produced in glands and circulate through the body to the target organ. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's a neurotransmitter or a hormone, both work on their target organs by... Whoops, wrong way here. Whoops, that's not it either. I've missed out. I've missed out something, but that doesn't matter. I'll go back. Pardon? What happens is that the neurotransmitter or the hormone bind to the receptor, and then they can make changes within the cell. And here's just a diagram representing it. Notice that they can only, this one here will fit this shape, but it won't this one. So it's like a key and a lock. A key can only unlock the door and make it enter into the house if the key fits the lock. And that's the way our receptors work. Well, let's have a look a bit first at the endocrine system. The endocrine system is controlled by the master gland here called the pituitary gland. These are found in the brain, and it releases its hormones into the bloodstream. But that in turn is controlled by another organ called the hypothalamus, which regulates things like thirst and temperature and appetite. Now, when the pituitary gland releases its hormones into the blood, they go to several places. There's our parathyroid and thyroid, the ovaries and testes, and the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are these two little organs here which cap our kidneys. And if you look at the structure up here, on the inside structure, it has an outer part called the cortex, and that is controlled by the pituitary gland, and it releases a stress hormone called cortisol and sex hormones and also several other hormones. The inside part, called the medulla, is controlled by the nervous system, and it releases adrenaline and noradrenaline. Have you heard of those words before? They're associated with what? Pardon? Stress. That's right, they are. Okay, let's have a look now at the nervous system. The basic cell of the nervous system is called the neuron or nerve cell. And it consists of these little branches here called dendrites, which receive messages from thousands of other nerve cells. Then we have the body and the axon, a branch where the electrical signal moves along, goes along here down to the end and out these little branches here called terminals onto the next cell, to the dendrites. Notice here this purple thing represents a fatty substance called a myelin sheath, which insulates the cell and makes the nerve signal move much faster. No doubt you've heard of multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis occurs when there is damage to this, the myelin sheath. Now, the electrical signal, the message, starts here at the initial segment and it moves along here. What happens is there are little gates in the membrane of the axon and they open up and positively charged sodium flows into the axon. That moves along and causes the next gate here to open. More sodium comes in, flows along, gates here open, and so the message goes right along down here to the end, to the terminals. Once the signal is passed, that sodium is pumped back out again for the next signal to go along. Now when the electrical signal gets down here to the terminals, it causes calcium gates to open and calcium floods in. And calcium causes the neurotransmitters, these little dots in these sacs here, which are called vesicles, to be released outside the terminal. Now, the sending nerve cell and the receiving one do not touch. There's a little gap or cleft between them, just here, which is called a synapse. And these neurotransmitters diffuse across the gap and they bind here to the receptors and cause a change in this cell, so the signal goes to the next nerve. Once the neurotransmitter has done its job here, it's released again. Sometimes they go back up into these sacs and sometimes they're destroyed. Now, neurotransmitters differ in their size. Some are very small and some are huge structures. Candace Pert, who is a researcher in neurotransmitters, calls them molecules of emotion because they actually transmit our moods in our body. Drugs such as the likes of narcotic drugs, nicotine, they affect the body because they bind in these receptors. A lot of drugs, sorry?
Excuse me, is that a nerve end we're looking at?
This is the nerve end. This is the I'll go back up.
Sorry.
This is, no, that's good. That's down here, the very end here. And the receiving one is one of these ones. Okay?
Thank you.
That's okay. And a lot of drugs, medicinal drugs that they use, they either work on receptors or they stop neurotransmitters or they react in that area in some way. Now, there are two basic types of neurotransmitters. Some are excitatory. That means they send that pulse down the nerve cell, and some inhibit the action. Okay? Let's go back up. Most of the excitatory ones work around the dendrites. The synapses around the dendrites. The inhibitory ones are on the cell body, and they specially cluster here around the initial segment. And the inhibitory ones work by opening chloride gates, and chloride is a negatively charged molecule, so they cancel out the positive sodium ones. I find it very interesting that the inhibitory ones are clustered around here. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, "No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man, but God is faithful,
But you're able to temptation.
That's right. But
With the temptation.
make a way of escape. And the amazing thing is that God's made a way of escape with our inhibitory neurotransmitters. Now we may be tempted to do something wrong. So here we've got all these temptations coming in here, firing off positive. But then we say, I don't want to do this. Lord, help. And then do you know what happens? The inhibitory neurotransmitters act here and stop us from acting on it. That's amazing, isn't it? No, it's not amazing because we've got a God. But I think that's our way of escape. That He's put them all here and clustered them here at the last part where it can stop it. That to me is really wonderful. I love learning about the body because it doesn't just show to me what a wonderful creator, but I also see many lessons about redemption, and I get very excited, and I can't wait to tell the next person. Now, the synapse, this cleft here between the nerve cells reminds me that when man sinned, there became a separation between who? God and man. But Jesus, just as those neurotransmitters come across the gap, Jesus left heaven and came to this earth. And you know what? Can anybody remember what John 1:12 says? As many as received Him. That's right. As many as received Him, He gave the power, the right, the authority to become children of God to those who believe in His name. I'm sorry. To those who believe in His name. When we receive, just as when those transmitters, I don't think it's not working very well. There we go. Just as those transmitters, when they bind to the receptors, have the power to make changes within the next cell. When we receive Christ, what does He give us power to do? Power to overcome. He gives us power to change us. It's amazing, isn't it? Now, God intends that when we receive Christ, we are to transmit His love, yes? To who? Others. To others. We're to receive Him, He wants to change our lives, and He wants us to transmit that love on down to other people. But there are inhibitors. What sort of things can inhibit us from transmitting that love to others? Any ideas?
Fear.
Fear? Self?
Rejection.
Rejection? There's so many, isn't there? They're inhibitors. What's more, as we said, when I said that when these transmitters get in the receptors, I said before that drugs false things can get in there. Can we have false gods that get in our God receptors? What sort of things are they? That's right, nearly everything. Anything can get where God wants, anything can take the place of God, can't it? Okay. Right, we want to have a look now at the big picture of the nervous system, the overall. Now, the nervous system consists of the CNS, central nervous system, which is the brain. This isn't working very well, it's died. Oh no, it hasn't. It's just my... And the spinal cord. And then we have... See, it has died. I think it's my nerves, don't you? At least this year I can work it on the screen, can't I? No, it has gone. No, it has definitely gone. Well, the outside, those stripes, are the peripheral nerves, the nerves which run to and from the body organs and the spinal cord. And then we have voluntary nerves which enable us, that we can choose to use. I can wave my hand because I'm choosing to do it. And then we have voluntary nerves, which keep our heart beating and our breathing going with us without us having to think about it. And they are called involuntary or an autonomic nervous system. And there's 3 parts to the autonomic nervous system. We have the enteric, which is the gut. Did you know that your gut's got a mind of its own? You're all laughing. It's true, isn't it? We feel a lot in our gut. Do you know why we feel a lot in the gut? It's because of all those neurotransmitters, those mood molecules. When we talk about having gut feelings, that's real. Because our feelings are actually molecules. The purpose of the enteric system is to control everything to do with digestion. From the front door to the back door, it controls it all. And then we have the sympathetic nervous system. Is it working? Well, it's a good lesson because you get what you pay for. That was only I was skiting before telling people, oh, have you seen my own pointer this year, and I can get it working. I can actually work it because I couldn't work it last year, if you might remember. And I said, it only cost me $2. We have $2 shops over there. Anyway, it's not working, sorry. The sympathetic system is the one that prepares our body for action when we've got to get going in a case of emergency. It's like an accelerator, and it controls our fight or flight response. You've heard of that? That's our stress response. It uses a neurotransmitter called noradrenaline. The parasympathetic system is an opposing force because you don't want to be revved up all the time, do you? It's like the brake, and it causes our body to come back to rest and digest. Doesn't that make you feel relaxed already? Just rest and digest. And that uses a chemical, a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Now we're just going to have a look and show what happens when you stimulate sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. Now, the idea of this sympathetic nervous system is going to prepare our body for action, and the first thing it wants to do is says, halt all unnecessary work. Well, you can get by without digesting for a while. So it sends messages to the gut to inhibit the secretions, and you get a dry mouth, and mine is dry now, so I think I might have a drink of water. And the gut movement decreases. You ever had your meal just sitting there? When you're stressed, that's what happens. The next thing it does is it wants to get energy available for the muscles to use. And what do you need for energy, do you know, in your body? You need oxygen. You need oxygen, and you need a fuel source, blood glucose. And how is that carried to the muscles? I hope you've learnt from last year. Blood, that's right. Okay. So the first thing that happened, well, I shouldn't say the first thing, all these things are happening all around the body, but the airways in the lung, they open up. And what does that allow the air to do? You get more air in. And the breathing is faster and deeper. Although if you have panic attacks, or you have bad breathing patterns, and a lot of us do, sometimes what happens when you're stressed is, what happens to your breathing? You're hyperventilating. It's not deeper. It's because you're breathing up here. The heart rate and the force increases, and that pushes the blood pressure up. And the parasympathetic is going to have the opposite effect always. The blood vessels to the muscles dilate. Well, why would they? That means they open up to the big muscles. Why would that happen? More oxygen, that's right. You want them ready for action. And they constrict or close down in the other areas, such as your hands and your feet. Actually, cold hands and cold feet can be a sign of prolonged stress. Somebody's laughing. Sweat glands are stimulated and the blood clotting increases. Why would blood clotting increase?
Injury.
Yes, so if there's injury, if you're fighting or you're having an accident, you don't want to lose that blood, so it's going to clot faster. So how do you think that these symptoms, these actions on the body are going to affect things like heart disease? It's going to increase them because we've got that higher blood pressure and our blood's clotting faster. And what's one of the, probably your biggest killer in Australia? Is it? It is heart? It generally is with, in these things. Diabetes, yeah, all those ones are pretty there. Okay, let's put it together now. Let's put it all together to see what happens when we're stressed. Our bodies, our mind are constantly receiving messages. It's not working. From our senses, and they go into that relay system right up on the right-hand corner called the thalamus. And the thalamus sends the messages to the seeing part of our brains and the, don't watch me, I'm putting my hands because I'm not putting them in the right places, the hearing part and the frontal part, which is the part where we do what? Where we do the thinking, we work out what does all this mean. It also sends it to two little almond-shaped bodies called the amygdala. Can you see where they are? Down there. The amygdala is an emotional centre for our brains. It registers fear. It registers voice tones, expressions of faces, and it causes the reflex action of fear in our faces. When when you start with that's caused by our amygdala. Now the amygdala is very close to that organ called the hippocampus. Anybody know what the hippocampus does? Is involved with? Anyone hazard a guess?
It's got something to do with recording life experiences.
It has.
But the information is processed through the amygdala or it registers through the hippocampus.
That's right. The hippocampus stores factual things about memory, and the amygdala attaches emotions to those memories. Have you ever walked into a situation and immediately you felt uneasy and you don't know why? I think we all have. Do you know what's happened? Your amygdala has picked up something in that environment, and it could be a smell. Often it is a smell. You might not be aware of it because it's closely associated with the amygdala, and your brain is remembering this was not good last time. This was not good last time, you've got to do something about it. These are things that happen to us all the time, and we don't know. We don't know why we're feeling like this. Might be something that happened to you when you were a child. You know, when I was about 4 or 5, my little baby cousin died, and I remember seeing the baby in a coffin, and they had chrysanthemums. And chrysanthemums have quite a strong smell, don't they? And that, for some reason, just reminds me of that. Whenever I see smell a chrysanthemum, I'm reminded of that event. I'm telling you these things because sometimes we wonder, why are we getting these responses? Why are we acting this way, reacting this way?
Yeah, take the dog to the vet. The dog actually had quite a cute smell, quite good smelling, so I know it's not a good experience. You don't pick it up yourself.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Does that, what you're talking about, does that also, like if you had someone who passed away, does that also say similar thing, or same thing, like you remember things, nice things like that, or bad things, or sort of depresses you, or makes you feel bad?
Some of those things do influence us. We do have memories of people, and some are lovely memories, aren't they? And some people remind us of other people that have hurt us in the past, for example.
Can you go out sometimes when that person passed away, some people didn't treat that person right when they were alive. When they died, all of a sudden, you sort of blame yourself for their death.
That's a very interesting thing, and that's true. I will be talking about that in the afternoon meeting. So if you come back then, I'll tell you about my experience. I know exactly what you're talking about, that feeling of guilt. It's a common thing. It is associated with grief. Now, the frontal lobe there are connections between the frontal lobe and the amygdala, going backwards and forwards, but those from the amygdala to the frontal lobe are actually stronger than those going from here to there.
Researchers connected wires up to the brain to actually measure neural activity and what parts of the brain are stimulated. And apparently during worship, the amygdala that normally carries the highest emotional memories of pain and fear, during worship, when people are worshipping and the wires are measuring brain activity, it's the amygdala that's most highly activated. And so it's that vertical temporal lobe truly comes out with the
Praise God for that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, so I was saying that the pathways between the amygdala and the frontal part are actually stronger from the amygdala to the frontal part, and sometimes we get hijacked by our emotions. Do you know what I mean by that? I mean, we act without thinking. Has that ever happened to you? You think, what was I thinking of? Well, you know, you weren't thinking. You didn't get a chance to think at that stage. Because maybe you had a whole lot, maybe that amygdala was very activated. Often this will happen in extreme stress, won't it? You know, something becomes the last straw.
Excuse me. Sometimes when I'm in church, I'm listening to music and I'm singing to it. My whole body gets affected to it. Like, sometimes I start to cry, or get emotional, or my face expression, I kind of like I get cringes, or my jaw starts to hurt while I'm singing, or my body gets emotional, like I feel strained away, or I'm crying or something.
That shows you actually, doesn't it, really how that those molecules of emotion aren't just up here, are they? They flow through our whole body. So what happens is, so our body, our brain has registered that we're in a dangerous situation. We've got to get out of there, or we have to fight or flee. Okay, so the amygdala and the frontal lobe send messages down to that hypothalamus that we were talking about before. The hypothalamus will then send messages to the sympathetic nervous system, which uses noradrenaline as its neurotransmitter, and it goes to various body organs. like the lungs and the heart, and tell it to get ready for action. At the same time, it sends nerve impulses down to that adrenal medulla, which tell it to release hormones called noradrenaline and adrenaline. And how do the hormones get around to the body? Do you remember? They go through the blood, but they also affect the body organs, so they have a more sustained action. Now, while that's going on, at the same time, we have the hypothalamus, HPA, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal stress response. Our minds are really doing a lot of work, aren't they? So the hypothalamus sends a message to the pituitary gland, release your hormones, get the body ready for action, and these hormones circulate in the blood to the adrenal cortex, which tell it to release cortisol. And that cortisol has effect on all the body organs. The main purpose of cortisol is to give an ongoing source of energy. It breaks down fats into glucose. It also makes the adrenaline and noradrenaline unable to do its job better. And in normal quantities, it's anti-inflammatory. That's normal. Okay, now this stress system is designed to get us out of danger. But often in today's society, we're having little stresses all the day long, and we can't get away from it, can we? We can't flee, we can't move, we're not using up those stress hormones, and so we can stew in our juices. And that stewing in our juices, I think you all know what that's like, don't you? You know when you're stewing in your juice, don't you? Does anybody here not know what that's like? Don't see any hands going up. They make you sick, very sick. Okay, now most of us have one system in our body that could be weaker than the other parts. And so that might be the place that's going to get tapped first. Now, have these been given out? Yes, please, sorry. When you'll get these sheets of paper. The first one says common sources of stress, 1. The next one says common sources of stress, 2. That common sources of stress was supposed to be common symptoms of stress, but I made a computer problem there. But interesting, I just discovered it this morning, and when I looked at it, I thought, that's true actually. These symptoms of stress cause secondary stress. Does pain and sickness stress you? It does, doesn't it? Okay, so we can get things like, you've got a list here so you can go through it in your own time and see if you have these symptoms. But you might get things like muscle aches or tightness, back pain is very common, jaw ache. Upset digestive systems, well, that can be constipation, diarrhea, cramp, all sorts of things. Circulation system problems, dizziness, chest pains, high blood pressure. Immune system, what does your immune system do you know? Anybody remember from last time? White blood cells. Yes, what do they do? Fight bugs and cancer cells. We can get allergies, frequent colds. Gland and hormone system, you can have skin rashes, fatigue, arthritic pain, there's a whole lot of them. Common mental stress symptoms, emotional changes, anxiety or panic, frustration or anger, feeling depressed or guilty, feeling trapped and helpless. And then we have the thinking part of the brain. When you're feeling stressed, what happens to your brain? What happens to you people's brain?
It's hard or confused.
Confuse, that's one thing. It's hard and we might be forgetful. I suggest that you go through that list of symptoms and you tick off any that you experience. It's very important that you recognise your personal symptoms of stress. And yours could be different from mine. Any symptom is your personal traffic signal warning you to slow down or stop. How many of you people get stressed when you're waiting at a red traffic light? Be honest. It is. Thank you. That's it exactly. That is God's relaxation time. That is the time when you think, how stressed am I now? Am I tight? Am I uptight? What's my breathing like? Just relax. Say a prayer. Pardon? Pray for someone. Enjoy the scenery. Just slow down and relax. Okay, you're also on the front page, which is the real one, the real common sources of stress. If you go through that and tick off anything that you've been experiencing or experiencing now, and the more of those things you tick off, the more stress you'll be experiencing. And the more stress you're experiencing, the more likely you are to be having health problems. Did you know that? Well, there's quite a list there, but recently God showed me that there's an acronym to shorten all the list of what causes, and it's the RATs in life. The RATs in life. Rage, resentment, revenge, unforgiveness. A for anxiety, and I'm talking here about all forms of fear and anxiety, worry, guilt, shame. That all cause anxiety, doesn't it? Transitions and trials. What's a transition in life? Change in life. Do you know that there are three things that three elements that tend to be present in stress? Change, lack of control, and unpredictability. Anybody experience those in life? The more you have those, the more likely you're likely to have the problems. Also, the trials, grief. Self-destructive habits. And that's all the isms. What do I mean by isms? Anybody give an idea of an ism? Alcoholism. Workaholism. Pardon? Drugism. Yes, that's right.
Autism.
What's autism? Well, you've got the picture anyway. It can be all kinds of ism, can't it? Traditionalism can cause us stress sometimes. Pharisaism can cause us stresses. Pardon? Socialism? There's all kinds of isms that can cause problems in our life. Now, this winter we had a rat problem. And we just get rid of one and thought, we've got him. And then what? There was another one. And we'd wake up in the night. And what can you hear in the night with rats? Scratching and gnawing. And just as those rats gnaw holes in wood or anything, the rats and the stress rats gnaw into our health and into our bodies. But you know one of the worst kind of rats around, I think, is a dead rat. Why are you laughing? What am I going to say? The smell is very offensive. And have you ever had a rat that is dead and it's inaccessible? Or you can't find the source of it? You know what I'm talking about, don't you? It's frustrating when you can't find it. Do you know the worst kind of rats, I think, as far as stress are concerned, are the dead rats. You know what I mean by dead rats? The stress is from the past. Something that's happened years ago maybe, and they haven't been buried properly. They haven't been dealt with. And the stench of it overflows into our life and into our relationships. You know what I'm meaning? And so often, you know, we look at what's going on in our life, and we're mistaken by it. We think that that's the problem, but whereas it's a dead rat from a long time ago.
It's not that rat, but it's similar. A lot of people have problems with cockroaches. They're hard to get rid of.
That's true.
That's similar to basically problems and all this that we're involved about. Rats, cockroaches, the rats are hard to get rid of. Get rid of them, then they come back.
Are you listening to this? He's speaking truth here.
There are all different kinds of cockroaches.
There are. And there's all kinds of things from our past. And you know, you're very right about those cockroaches, but I call those cockroaches ants. Automatic negative thoughts. Anybody have them?
Ants, I think we all got ants.
We've all got ants. And what do ants do? They form trails, don't they? You watch them. Backwards and forwards over the same patch.
They work as a family.
They work as a... You're right. And you know we have a whole family of negative thoughts, don't we? And they go backwards and forwards in our mind. They make a track. They form patterns. They form pathways in our brain. But do you know something? There is power to get rid of those ant trails and the rats.
And the cockroaches.
And the cockroaches. And the locusts and the palmer worms and the canker worms, all of them.
And the moths.
And the moths, the whole lot. Romans 12:2 says, do not be conformed, but be transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. You know, recently I discovered that little word transformed in the Greek is from metamorphos, which is the word that the metamorphosis comes from. What's metamorphosis? Can anybody tell me? That's right. It's the change from a caterpillar into a butterfly. And that is the way that God changes us. It's not all at once. It's little bit by little bit. But just think about it. Think about that caterpillar. What does the caterpillar have to do to grow? Eat. Eat. That's the only thing it has to do. If it eats, you know what happens? It grows. And what happens to its skin? It pops. It sheds its skin.
For us to believe we can go or the work of God, we have to eat the knowledge in God.
Amen. Amen. You're ahead of me here all the way, isn't he? You're ahead of me all the way here. They eat and then they shed that skin and they get another one, and then one day they form a cocoon, and then what happens? They're transformed within that cocoon, and then they become a creature of different habits. They don't do it. There's one thing that they do have to do. They have to eat to begin with. Okay, let's use this because I believe this is how God changes us. We need to eat His Word. His knowledge, His Word. We need to feed on it. We need to digest it, memorize it, think on it. And when we do that, we'll grow a little. We'll shed some of the old skin. We eat more. What happens? We grow a little more. And then we shed another old skin, and it goes and it goes. But you know something else that we need? We then need a cocoon experience. Do you know what a cocoon experience is? A cocoon experience is when your life is turned upside down and you're hanging by a thread. You ever been there? I bet a lot of you are in that place now. We can't do without them. And when you're on that thread, the winds of life blow, right? And you don't know how long you're going to be able to hang on for. And then in that cocoon, you are imprisoned. You are walled in by circumstances. You can't move forward and you can't move backwards. And it's dark in there. You can't see what God's doing. Or is he even there? And it's lonely. But it's in those times, it's in our cocoon experiences that God is what? Transforming us. We can't see it happening. The butterfly doesn't see it happening. And we can be hanging in that, by the way, for days or weeks or months or decades or a lifetime.
He's also always there when you least expect it, always need him the most. He never abandons you.
Amen.
Always there, he pray for him, ask him for forgiveness, or ask him to forgive your sins, or ask him for pain, all that. He'll try his best to help you.
Amen. Amen. When we're in there, do you know what all the butterfly or the caterpillar butterfly, whatever it's becoming, all it can do is what? Wait. Wait and rest. And who does the work? Who does the transforming? God. And only he can transform us.